You know what I miss most? Someone remembering how I take my coffee. The old man's voice was soft, almost apologetic, as he settled into his usual corner booth at Rosie's Diner. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the newspaper, more ritual than reading these days. 28-year-old Marla Brennan paused mid-stride, coffee pot in hand, and something in his words cracked through her practiced smile. She'd been waitressing here for 6 years, ever since her mother's medical bills had swallowed her college fund, and she'd learned to hear what people weren't saying. 2 sugars, no cream, she said gently, pouring his cup. And you fold the sports section first, even though you read the obituaries. Walter Finch looked up at her, his faded blue eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. You notice. Everyone deserves to be noticed, Mr. Finch. That was 4 months ago. Since then, Walter had become part of Marla's daily rhythm. Every morning at 7:15, he'd shuffle through the door, his cardigan slightly too large, his shoes carefully polished despite their age. He never ordered much, toast, scrambled eggs, coffee, but he always left a $5 tip on an $8 check. Marla learned his story in fragments, the way you learn about weather, constant, revealing, inevitable. His wife Dorothy had died 3 years ago. His son had moved to Seattle, too busy for phone calls. His grandson visited once, maybe twice a year, always in a hurry, always checking his phone. I don't blame him, Walter told her one morning, his voice steady but hollow. People have lives. I'm just in between chapters now, waiting for the epilogue. Marla reached across the counter and squeezed his weathered hand. Maybe you're just starting a new chapter, Mr. Finch. Maybe it just hasn't been written yet. She started doing small things, saving him the newspaper before other customers could scatter it, making sure his booth stayed reserved during the morning rush. On his birthday, which he'd mentioned only once, she brought him a slice of apple pie with a single candle. Walter had wept openly, unashamed. "You're the only one who remembered," he whispered. But Marla noticed other things too, how Walter's hands shook more each week, how he sometimes forgot he'd already told her a story, how he'd started walking with a cane, then too. His clothes hung looser, his smile took more effort. One Tuesday he didn't show up. Marla felt the absence like a missing heartbeat. She found his address in the phone book, an old habit in a digital age, and visited after her shift. The house was small, tidy, clearly too big for one person. Walter answered the door in his pajamas, looking embarrassed. "I fell," he admitted. "Nothing broken, just tired, so tired, Marla." She started coming by after work, bringing groceries, helping with prescriptions, reading him the newspaper when his eyes grew too weak. Her manager at the diner complained about her shortened hours, but Marla couldn't stop. Walter had no one else, and she understood loneliness intimately. It had been her companion since her father left and her mother's illness had consumed everything. "Why do you do this?" Walter asked one evening, his voice barely a whisper. "You don't owe me anything." Marla adjusted his blanket, blinking back tears. "Because someone should. Because you matter. Because kindness isn't something we give when it's convenient. It's something we give because we're human." 3 weeks later, Walter died peacefully in his sleep. Marla found out when the hospice nurse called. Walter had listed her as his emergency contact. She stood in the diner's kitchen and cried for 20 minutes straight, mourning a man who'd become family without either of them planning it. The funeral was small. Marla, the hospice nurse, 3 neighbors who barely knew him. Then, as the service ended, a man in an expensive suit rushed in, late, breathless, phone in hand. "I'm Marcus Finch," he announced, "Walter's grandson. Where is everyone?" Marla stared at him, anger and grief swirling. "You're looking at everyone. We're all he had." Marcus's face flushed. "I was busy. I had work." "He died alone," Marla said quietly, her voice breaking, waiting for someone to remember he existed. Marcus left without another word. Marla thought that was the end, a sad, inevitable conclusion to a lonely life. But 2 weeks later, Marcus appeared at the diner, flanked by 2 lawyers. Marla's heart sank. She'd heard stories about families fighting over estates, about people emerging from nowhere to claim what lonely people left behind. "Miss Brennan," one lawyer said formally, "we need to speak with you about Walter Finch's will." Marla's hand shook. "I don't want anything. I just wanted him to feel like he mattered." Marcus stepped forward, and she saw something unexpected in his eyes, shame, deep and raw. "My grandfather left you the house, but that's not why we're here." He paused, swallowing hard. "He also left a letter for me. The lawyer says I should read it with you present." They sat in Walter's old booth. The lawyer handed Marcus an envelope, yellowed and carefully sealed. Marcus's hands trembled as he read aloud. "Marcus, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I don't blame you for being busy. Life is demanding, and I was just an old man. But I want you to know about Marla Brennan. She's a waitress who makes $8 an hour plus tips. She has nothing extra to give, and yet every day she gave me everything that mattered. Her time, her attention, her heart. She remembered my coffee. She remembered my birthday. She saw me when I'd become invisible to everyone else, including you. I'm leaving her the house because she gave me something worth more than property. She gave me dignity in my final chapter. Learn from her, Marcus. Success means nothing if you're too busy to love people. Wealth means nothing if you can't remember how someone takes their coffee. Be better than I taught you to be. Be more like Marla." Marcus's face crumpled. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he looked at Marla with devastation and gratitude. "I was so focused on building my career, on making him proud through success, that I forgot to just be with him." Marla reached across the table, her own tears falling. "He knew you loved him, Marcus. He just needed to feel it more often." "Teach me," Marcus whispered. "Teach me how to see people the way you saw him." Over the following months, something unexpected unfolded. Marcus started coming to the diner regularly, not for business meetings or quick meals, but to sit and talk, to learn about the regulars, to remember names, preferences, stories. He cut back his hours at work. He started volunteering at the senior center Walter had mentioned, but never attended. "Too proud to admit I was lonely," Walter had said. Marla and Marcus became friends, then something more. Not romance born from grief, but partnership born from shared purpose. They turned Walter's house into a community space where lonely elders could gather for coffee, conversation, and connection. They called it Walter's Corner, and it became what he'd always deserved, a place where everyone was noticed, remembered, and valued. 1 year after Walter's death, Marla stood at the grand opening, looking at the crowded room full of people who'd been invisible until someone took the time to see them. Marcus stood beside her, holding her hand. "Do you think he knows," Marcus asked softly, "that he changed everything?" Marla smiled through tears. "I think he always knew that one act of kindness could change everything. He just needed someone to prove it to him first." An elderly woman approached, holding a coffee cup. "Excuse me, dear, how do you take yours?" Marla's breath caught. "2 sugars, no cream." "I'll remember that," the woman said, smiling. "Everyone deserves to be remembered." And in that moment, Marla understood what Walter had been trying to tell her all along. We're not here to be remembered by history or monuments or wealth. We're here to be remembered by each other, in the small moments, in the daily rituals, in the simple act of seeing someone and saying without words, "You matter, you're not alone," and someone remembers how you take your coffee. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, subscribe, and comment.